Have you ever wondered what's in our blood? What it can tell about our well-being? What about the innovative technology used to unravel the mystery of what's in our blood? Hello, I'm Dean Whiting, and this is It's in Our Blood, the podcast series that explores the critical role technology plays in the pathology laboratory, in hospitals, and in the community setting. So welcome everybody to this very important podcast. We're doing an out of cycle podcast on coronavirus, and we're very, very fortunate indeed to have Professor Bill Rawlinson along again. You might remember Professor Rawlinson from earlier in the podcast series. Professor Rawlinson is the Senior Medical Virologist and the Director of Virology and Serology of the Virology and Serology Lab at New South Wales Pathology in Randwick. So, Bill, thank you very much for joining us again. I know you're extremely busy at the moment, so we really appreciate your time.
That's a great pleasure.
Now, look, we're hearing a lot about coronavirus at the moment. Can you tell us how severe is the current coronavirus threat to the health of Australians? What do you think is likely here, especially around the prevalence, the transmissibility, and the potential lethality of it?
The issue is extremely important, and I think we need to address it in two ways. We need to have a hope that our public health control and the things that we're doing will make a difference, and they have so far. We also do need to have planning for a worse outcome if that eventuates, so that we're not less surprised. We're basing a lot of what we do on our experience, which is really quite significant, with SARS, of course, in 2002, 2003, with MERS, which has continued as another coronavirus, of course, spread from camels, particularly in the Middle East, although involving other countries from time to time. And, of course, a lot of experience with influenza, particularly the 2009 pandemic influenza, as well as ongoing avian influenza. So a lot of what we're thinking and a lot of what we're learning are based on paradigms that have been established over the last 17 years or so. We're quite concerned, of course, that this novel coronavirus, which is now called 2019 novel coronavirus, that this may have some of the characteristics of SARS, and of course the particular thing that is concerning is that people are dying when they've acquired the coronavirus. The background of this is that coronaviruses typically cause colds, somewhere around 10%, maybe as high as 30% in some populations. And so coronaviruses are a very common infection that occur in people. What's happened with this virus, as with SARS, we believe, is that it's a zoonotic infection spread from animals to humans, and probably it's closely related genetically to bat coronaviruses, and probably mutated in such a way through another mammal vector before infecting humans that it's become able to spread from person to person. And because of its original characteristics, it's maintained the ability in humans to replicate. We probably don't have a significant immune response to it, and so what's happening is that our other response to other coronaviruses is not preventing this originally animal-derived coronavirus from growing and causing disease. And in some people, that disease is very mild. In the majority of people, it's similar to other coronaviruses, but in some populations, and it does appear to be people who are older with underlying diseases, so very much similar to the influenza-susceptible group, those people are developing pneumonia and in some cases dying. And so that's really why we're concerned, that there is a group of people at risk and some of those are dying.
Yeah. So that's it's clearly serious, and we read each day that the number of cases is increasing. And even with potentially the lowish death rate, if we have enough people being infected, then that becomes the death rate becomes significant. So tell me, what are some of the challenges in detecting the virus, both clinically and maybe in the lab?
So things that have happened, and of course we're learning as we go, are that we've had people who have had pre-symptomatic disease. We originally believed that they were not infectious on the basis of some early epidemiology, but later epidemiology shows that it's very likely that people are infectious prior to developing symptoms. What that means is that there's a pool of people who are at risk. We believe the incubation period is usually around 4 days, but up to 14 days. So people who have acquired the infection, no symptoms, and they can pass it on. We still believe that the highest levels of coronavirus are when you're symptomatic, and so that's the highest likelihood of spread. So we are learning about the epidemiology, and we are learning about the types of spread that we do see.
Yeah. So then it becomes tricky, because if you've got people who are infectious but not clinically, not have clinical symptoms, I guess that means that the role of the lab in maybe detecting and managing becomes quite important. So, what role at the moment does the lab and technology have in detecting and managing this challenge?
So the laboratory becomes key, exactly as you said. It's important that testing, which has now been extended to GPs, to emergency departments, and has become more generally available. Testing is then allowed to occur so that we can find these groups who may be spreading it, but who are less symptomatic, or in some cases pre-symptomatic. Again, it's very important to realise the lab's also important in determining what infection somebody, for example, who's returned from China or who's a contact of somebody who's had the novel coronavirus infection, exactly what infection might be causing their fever, their sniffy throat, their sniffy nose rather, their sore throat, those things. Because, of course, the Northern Hemisphere has a far larger number of other infections, rhinoviruses, para-influenza viruses, influenza viruses. So it's very important that we detect what might be causing that infection. And in fact, numerically, the 2019 coronavirus is a small part of that. So the laboratory is key, not only in ruling out 2019 novel coronavirus as a cause of somebody's symptoms, but also in making a diagnosis of respiratory virus where relevant, and particularly, of course, for influenza, where therapy, vaccination may be of relevance. And that can be done using the usual commercial tests that we all use. And increasingly, as you all probably know, we're using multiplex PCRs for a range of respiratory agents.
Yes, exactly. And this morning I read with interest the Hong Kong health authorities have developed an algorithm for exactly as you're suggesting, that is to rule out the multiple other causes of the respiratory symptoms that people get. And I believe this same kind of algorithm is being rolled out in other places, maybe even Australia, where we can indeed use that PCR screening to maybe say rule out coronavirus and rule in maybe other causes. So it leads me to just talk a little bit, maybe ask you a little bit about. We have a couple of, I guess, technologies available. PCR screening would be one, and maybe sequencing for confirmatory testing. Is that what we're doing at the moment?
At the moment, we're diagnosing based upon a specific PCR assay, and that's a real-time PCR with a specific probe, and so we're not going ahead to sequencing. The very small number, fortunately, of cases that have been diagnosed in Australia so far has meant that we are doing whole genome sequencing on those. We and other laboratories have a lot of whole genome sequencing facilities available, and so we are able to do that, but that's not been a part of our diagnostic algorithm. That's more looking at changes that may be occurring in the virus as it moves from not only animals into humans, but from different populations around the world.
Yeah, exactly. And look, the technology, I'm aware, especially around the sequencing of the viral RNA, also has a role in helping develop the vaccine, right? I mean, it must do, mustn't it? Because if we're going to identify the appropriate epitopes, Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, so sequences are the basis, for example, of our influenza vaccine in going forward. And so, yes, we require sequences as well as we require live virus. And, of course, as recently has been announced a week or two ago, the reality is that we can now grow the virus in Australia. It's not that hard, although the really hard part of that is that you need to have a facility where you can have appropriate containment. And so growing the virus also assists with the production of vaccines, as well, of course, as the production of diagnostic assays, of assessment of diagnostic assays using the QAP.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, we have an Australian company that has got a very interesting way of solving this analytical problem, and they're looking for some reference material as we speak. So I'm talking to the health department about that, if we can get some to prove up their interesting approach to this. Vaccines are important, right? I mean, how relevant is development of a vaccine to this particular virus?
Vaccines are important in the longer term, but of course it does change. It does mean that it does have a long lead time, and antivirals are very important in the shorter lead time. There are proposals to study vaccines in Australia. There's been several proposals from a couple of states. There are, of course, international efforts, and we do, as you say, have, for example, epitope-designed vaccines rather than attenuated live vaccines, things like that. So they're important. It's very important to realise that having antivirals and repurposing antivirals, as have been done in some trials in China and elsewhere, using antiretrovirals such as Kaletra, which is ritonavir plus lopinavir, using that in combination with things like IVIG and in some cases using other ones has been important in allowing the antivirals to be assessed and allowing urgent things to be done, because vaccines, as important as they are, and I'm a great believer in vaccines, they're a tremendous way of preventing infectious diseases, do have a longer lead time and do require a lot of regulatory work.
Oh, yeah, of course. And with that in mind, Pathology Technology Australia is working very closely with the Health Department, with the TGA. This is a team game, right, Bill? This is everybody. It's all in here. Everybody's in to make sure we can contain this and to make sure that we're well prepared to deal with it. So, the industry is fully engaged here, and there's not probably a half a day goes by without us discussing something with the Health Department or TGA, and that's as it should be. Just finally, what I mean, you gave some great advice in your flu podcast in the middle of last year. What advice do you have for people here, to maybe protect themselves and help themselves in challenges like this?
I think there's very clear advice available online from the Commonwealth Health, from New South Wales Health in my case, but also from other state departments. It's very clear. And so the first thing is go online, use the official websites. Also the WHO, the CDC in the US has a very good website. Those are really good places to get accurate and up-to-date information because they are updated regularly. The second thing is that the usual practices for prevention of flu, hand washing, coughing into a tissue, putting it in the bin, avoiding people who are at risk with, coughing or with respiratory illnesses, taking notice of the epidemiology if you've been in contact with somebody, for example, who is at risk. All those things that are really obvious, normal respiratory virus preventions will work with this coronavirus. And finally, I think keeping up to date. I think it's very important that people realise this is changing. It's changing daily, and we're getting a lot more information, and those changes are informing what we do in a scientific and intelligent way, and using that information to to appropriately act, in terms of travel advice, in terms of contact advice, in terms of therapy, all those things. So in many ways, it's not business as usual because this is new and we are learning, but it is very much that we can apply a lot of the paradigms we have to controlling this virus.
And that's it. And I think from my perspective, the reason that the technology companies can move so fast is because in Australia we have a well-funded, vibrant laboratory technology industry. So and also, I mean, the importance of getting your information from from accredited authorities rather than from Uncle Joe down the street on Twitter, which might not be exactly accurate. So Bill, thank you so much. I know your time is absolutely crunched at the moment, so we appreciate it very much, and thank you very much. And to everybody out there, I hope you learn a lot from this podcast, and we look forward to bringing you more in this series very soon. Thank you for listening to this edition of It's in Our Blood. Look out for further topics in this series or go to pathologytechnology.org.au. This podcast is produced by London Agency, Melbourne, Australia.